On the surface, I was just an old woman living quietly in my family home. But behind closed doors, the people I loved most were dismantling my life piece by piece. They thought I was too weak to fight back. They were wrong, and I had the letters to prove it. The first morning of the new year should smell of promise. Mine smelled of yesterday's coffee, bitter, burnt at the edges, lingering in the air, like a memory that refused to leave. The living room was still dim, the weak winter sunlight spilling through the half-closed blinds in pale slants. Outside, the snow lay heavy on the street, a silent white shroud. Inside, the muffled clatter of pans and the low murmur of voices leaked in from the kitchen. Marcus's voice, low and irritable. Cheryl's sharper, slicing through the air, like the edge of a knife. My house, my parents' house before me, had once been a place of warmth. The scent of baked bread, the creak of the rocking chair in the corner, the steady tick of the old mantel clock. Now it felt like a prison. I moved carefully between the furniture, not because my body had slowed at 80, but because I had learned that in this house, my presence was a thing to be navigated, not celebrated. They had moved in 5 years ago, all talk of helping me. Marcus had said it was only until things got better for him and Cheryl. He never said better from what. But I knew. Gambling debts don't vanish with time. They just grow hungrier. And Cheryl carried her bitterness like jewelry, wearing it for the world to see. "You're just a dried-up old woman who never did anything important," she had told me once, her lips curling into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. It wasn't the first insult. It wouldn't be the last. But that one lodged somewhere deep. I had spent my life teaching others to find power in words, and now words were the tools used to strip me down. I lowered myself into the armchair by the window, my knees protesting, my eyes catching on the photographs along the wall. My students, my younger self in the staff room, smiling. I thought of the years I'd spent in classrooms, coaxing shy voices into poetry, watching young minds unfold. There had been a time when I believed I'd made a difference. Now, I wasn't so sure. I felt smaller each year, shrinking not from age, but from being diminished day by day. The sound of the front door opening cut through my thoughts. Caleb's voice floated in warm, bright, carrying the easy confidence of youth. "Grandma!" he called. I rose to meet him, and for a moment, everything else fell away. My grandson, tall and broad-shouldered at 20, with that mop of dark hair he never quite tamed. He pulled me into a hug, the kind that made me feel like I hadn't been invisible for so long. Behind him, Marcus and Cheryl emerged from the kitchen, smiling with an ease I knew was a performance. For Caleb's benefit, Marcus's arm even rested casually around Cheryl's waist. "Mom's been cooking all morning," Cheryl announced, as if the kitchen had ever seen her lift a spatula. "You'll love the roast." "Hi." Caleb didn't notice the small, sharp glance she threw me, or the way Marcus's eyes darted to the side, calculating. He only saw a family, intact and welcoming. We sat together in the dining room, Caleb talking about his classes, his friends, the pressure of upcoming exams. He asked me if I was keeping well. I smiled, told him I was fine. He said I looked a little tired, and I brushed it off. "Just slowing down, dear," as one does. What? I didn't tell him that I'd been scrubbing the kitchen floor on my hands and knees 2 nights ago because Cheryl had said it looked disgraceful. I didn't tell him about the bills Marcus had asked me to cover, promising to repay me when the tables turned in his favor. I didn't tell him that, sometimes, lying awake at night, I wondered what it would be like to lock my bedroom door and never open it again. Instead, I told him about the winter sky, about the book I was reading, about the snow piling high against the mailbox. I kept my voice light. Later, when Caleb was in the living room flipping through my old photo albums, I lingered in the doorway, watching him. He had his mother's eyes, but they were softer, unclouded by the years. I wanted to protect that, and yet, somewhere deep, I felt the stirrings of a past I had kept buried. The years when I was not just a teacher but a secret letter writer during the Vietnam War. Words sent out into the world, unsigned, to wives and mothers and children of men fighting far from home. Words that had meant something. Words that had mattered. I could almost feel the old pen in my hand again. That was before my voice began to fade. Before I let this house, my own house, become the place where silence was safer than truth. By March, the snow had turned gray at the edges. The kind that no longer looked pure, but tired. So was I. It began with the phone calls I didn't know about until it was too late. Cheryl had a gift for turning her cruelty into something that sounded like concern. She told neighbors, my neighbors, that I was slipping, that I misplaced things, forgot names, repeated myself like a broken record. And then she added the real poison, that I was hoarding money, keeping some secret stash, while my son struggled to keep the household running. The words traveled faster than winter wind. I learned about them in the worst possible way at my book club. It had been my one refuge. Meeting at the community center twice a month, discussing novels over weak coffee and supermarket cookies. That day, I walked in wearing my favorite blue cardigan, the one Caleb had given me for Christmas. I was ready to discuss a memoir we'd all been reading. Instead, a woman named Linda, someone I'd known for 15 years, looked me straight in the eye and said, "Greedy hag." The words landed with a slap. The room went silent, except for the sound of my own pulse pounding in my ears. I saw the quick exchange of glances, the slight shuffle of chairs. Some avoided my eyes, others just stared, curious to see if the rumor was true. I forced a small smile, pretending I hadn't heard, but the humiliation pressed against my ribs like a vice. When I came home, Marcus was waiting. The moment Cheryl disappeared into the laundry room, he shut the kitchen door behind us. His voice was low, but it carried the sharpness of a blade. "You need to sign over the house, Ma. It'll make things easier for everyone. And if you keep refusing..." He let the sentence trail off, his eyes narrowing. "Well, I can't promise. I'll remember to pick up your prescriptions next week. You know how forgetful I am." The message was clear. That night, I tried to scrub the kitchen floor. Not because it needed it, but because keeping busy kept my hands from shaking. The mop slipped. I fell hard, the jolt shooting up my hip and into my back. 2 hours later, I was in a hospital bed, the antiseptic smell clawing at my nostrils. The overhead lights made everything look too sharp, too cold. I lay there listening to the steady beep of the monitor, the occasional shuffle of nurses outside my curtain. No one came. Not Marcus. Not Cheryl. Not even a neighbor with flowers, though I had brought them countless casseroles over the years. I stared at the pale green curtain for what felt like hours, wondering how I had become someone who could vanish for a night and be missed by no one. When I came home, I started writing again, not in the way I once had, crafting carefully measured letters to soldiers' families during the war. This time, the letters were unsigned, addressed to Margaret, a retired lawyer I'd known long ago, and Thomas, a journalist whose work I respected. I didn't tell them who I was, not yet. I just wrote in careful strokes, testing the water, hinting at the way my life had shrunk, the way I was being erased piece by piece. It was the only thing that kept me from dissolving entirely. A week later, Caleb came for his spring break. He bounded in with the same easy smile, hugging me so tightly my ribs ached. And it was only then he saw the fading bruise on my arm. "What happened, Grandma?" I felt the pause between his question and my answer. Cheryl appeared behind him before I could speak, tossing her hair and laughing lightly. Oh, she's always bumping into things. Clumsy as a cat in a room full of rocking chairs. Caleb frowned, but I smiled. "She's right, dear. Just me being silly." It was a lie. But it was the kind that kept his eyes free of the shadows I'd learned to live with. By June, the air in the house felt heavier. Summer had a way of making everything close in the heat, settling in the corners. The faint smell of old wood and damp fabric that no amount of open windows could chase away. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. I had gone to the library to return a stack of books and print a letter I didn't dare send from home. When I came back, the air inside smelled faintly of cigarette smoke, though no one in this house had ever smoked. My stomach knotted. In the living room, Marcus was standing by my desk, drawers pulled open, papers scattered like leaves after a storm. His eyes were sharp, his breath quick. In his hand was one of my letters, one I had written to Margaret, still unsigned, folded neatly. "What is this?" His voice was low, but the anger in it was unmistakable. "It's nothing you need to worry about," I said, moving towards him. He slammed the paper down on the desk. "Nothing? You're writing to outsiders about our family? You think you can run to strangers and make me look like some kind of monster?" Before I could answer, he pulled a cardboard box from the bottom shelf, the one I hadn't touched in years, but knew by heart. My wartime letters. Every page I had saved from the years I wrote to families during the war. Words I had poured my youth into, trying to bring light to people living in shadow. "Marcus, please," but he was already walking toward the kitchen. I followed him out the back door, the sunlight hitting my eyes hard. He dropped the box onto the patio, struck a match from a pack I hadn't seen before. The flame caught quickly, the dry paper eager to burn. The smell was immediate, sharp, bitter, with a sweetness that turned my stomach. Pages curled and blackened. Words I could still remember by heart, lifting as ash into the summer air. I wanted to reach in, to pull them out, but the heat drove me back. My life's work, the proof that I had once mattered, gone in minutes. I stood there until the fire died. The box, nothing but charred edges. Marcus didn't even look at me as he stepped past. What he didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that I had digitized my most precious letters months earlier. They were stored on a small USB drive tucked inside a thick, dusty dictionary on the bottom shelf of my bookcase. I had kept it there for safekeeping, almost as if I'd known this day might come, but the loss still hollowed me out. I moved through the next days in silence, my hands busy, but my mind fixed on those ashes. Cheryl's gossip had only grown meaner. At the grocery store, the cashier didn't greet me, just scanned my items with the bored efficiency of someone serving a stranger. 2 women from church turned away before I could speak. My world was shrinking by the week. I decided I wouldn't vanish quietly. The next morning, I mailed 2 thick envelopes, one to Margaret, the other to Thomas. The letters were still careful, still unsigned, but I gave more detail this time, enough to paint a picture without handing over my name. A week later, Caleb came home for summer break. The heat clung to him as he walked in, a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. I was in the kitchen when I heard it. Cheryl's voice, high and mocking, drifting from the living room. She spends all day writing her stupid letters, like anyone cares what she has to say. Marcus's voice followed, louder, sharper. She could end all this if she'd just sign the damn house over. But no, she'd rather play martyr. I froze. Caleb was standing in the hallway, just out of sight, his brow furrowed. He didn't say anything then, but I saw the shift in his eyes later at dinner, the quiet suspicion, the way he watched his father's hands as he spoke. He didn't yet know the full story, but he was beginning to see the cracks. And cracks, I thought, can be widened. By September, the air had turned crisp again, the morning smelling faintly of wet leaves. I was folding laundry in the living room when the knock came. When I opened the door, Margaret stood there. Older now, hair silver and cut short, but her eyes still had that lawyer's sharpness, tempered by something warmer. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, her coat still on, her leather bag hanging from one shoulder. "I think you've been writing to me," she said softly, watching my face. I tried to laugh, to pretend confusion, but my voice faltered. I don't know what you mean. She set her bag down, sat on the edge of the armchair, and leaned forward, her voice low but steady. Beverly, I've read those letters a dozen times. I know your phrasing, your stories, the way you dodge your own name. You don't have to pretend with me. For a moment I held my ground, and then something inside cracked. The words poured out, not everything, but enough. The insults, the pressure to give up the house, the burning of my letters. My voice shook, and my hands wouldn't stay still. Margaret listened without interrupting. When I stopped, she reached for my hand. You have options. I'll keep your confidence if you want, but you can't go on like this. You deserve better. I nodded, though my chest felt tight. The idea of action was both a lifeline and a noose. 2 days later, Thomas's article appeared in the local paper. It didn't name me, or Marcus, or Cheryl, just a piece about elder abuse in small towns, told in a way that made it impossible not to recognize the truth if you were close enough to it. The whispers started almost immediately cautious, darting glances at the grocery store. Neighbors lingering just a moment too long when passing my gate. That weekend, Caleb came home. The leaves in the yard were beginning to turn, and we spent the morning in the living room, dusting shelves and sorting through stacks of books. I was halfway through wiping down a picture frame when I saw him pause, a puzzled look on his face. He had pulled the old dictionary from the bottom shelf, and there, tucked inside, was the USB drive. "What's this?" he asked. My first instinct was to take it from him, but I forced a smile. "Just some old files. Nothing important." But curiosity is a powerful thing. He carried it to his laptop, plugged it in. I busied myself with the books, my heart pounding as I heard the faint click of files opening. It was silent for a long time. Then, "Grandma?" I turned. His eyes were wide, scanning the screen. The wartime letters were open first, those pages full of hope and comfort I had sent to strangers decades ago. But he had also found the recent ones, the careful records of insults, the dates of threats, the description of the day Marcus burned my past. He looked at me, his face pale. "Is this true?" Before I could answer, footsteps came from the kitchen. Marcus and Cheryl entered, their voices bright, with false cheer. Caleb stood, turning on them. "You've been treating her like this? All this time?" They exchanged glances, their denial quick and oily. "She's exaggerating," Cheryl said. Marcus added, "You know how she gets." I didn't speak. My eyes were on Caleb, on the way the trust was leaving his face, replaced by something sharper. That night, he came to my room. Saturday, on the edge of my bed, his voice low but certain. "You're my hero, Grandma. I'm sorry I didn't see it before. But I'm here now. We'll fix this." Relief washed over me, but it was tangled with fear. I had pulled him into the shadows with me. And once you've seen the dark, you can never quite unsee it. By November, the air had turned sharp, the kind that bites at your cheeks as soon as you step outside. I wore my heaviest coat to Albany that morning. The courthouse was colder, still not in temperature, but in atmosphere. I sat on a hard wooden bench outside the courtroom, my hands folded tight in my lap. Margaret sat beside me, calm as a still pond. Caleb was on my other side, his knee bouncing under the weight of his restlessness. When we entered, Marcus was already there. He didn't look at me, his eyes fixed somewhere beyond. Cheryl, though, met my gaze. She gave me the smallest of smirks, a glint of something like triumph flickering in her eyes. The proceedings began. The judge's voice was steady, the rhythm of legal terms both foreign and familiar, a language that felt like it belonged to someone else's life, not mine. Margaret laid out the case with precision. She presented my medical records, showing the neglect after my fall. She brought forward the letters, my words, read aloud in a courtroom where every syllable felt heavy, and then Caleb took the stand. He spoke with a steadiness that made my throat ache. He told them about the day he found the USB drive, about reading my wartime letters first, and then the recent ones. He described how I had changed over the years, the tiredness in my eyes, the way I moved more quietly in my own home, the way I spoke less. He looked at the judge when he said, "I didn't see it before. I wish I had. But I know it now." Marcus kept his gaze fixed downward. Cheryl whispered something to her lawyer, her lips tight. When the judge announced that my assets would be frozen to prevent further exploitation, I felt a wave of relief. Not joy, not yet, but the loosening of a knot I had carried for too long. It wasn't victory, but it was the first step towards safety. Back at home that night, I sat at my desk with a pen in hand. I had made a decision. My savings, along with an unpublished manuscript, the collection of my wartime letters, intertwined with my new writings, would go to Sarah, a former student I had mentored decades ago. She had once been the shy girl in the back row, scribbling poems on notebook corners. When I called her, her voice broke before she said a word. She came the next afternoon, standing in my doorway with tears in her eyes. "You gave me my voice when I was young," she said, holding the manuscript to her chest. "Now, I'll make sure yours is heard." It was then I knew what came next. I could not stay here, surrounded by walls that had heard too many whispered insults, too many slammed doors. Rochester was calling a supportive community where I could live among friends who valued me, where my days could be about writing, not surviving. I walked through the house one last time that evening, my fingers brushing the furniture, the door frames, the edges of the photographs on the wall. The house felt less like mine than it ever had. And for the first time in years, that didn't hurt. I was leaving. And this time, it was on my terms. The first night in Rochester, I lay in bed, listening to the hum of the heater and the faint murmur of voices down the hallway. My own room, my own bed. The walls were painted a warm cream, the curtains a soft floral print. Nothing expensive, but everything chosen for comfort, not control. It felt unreal. For the first time in years, I didn't have to listen for footsteps outside my door, didn't have to measure my breathing so as not to disturb anyone. I could turn on the bedside lamp at midnight if I wanted, read until my eyes were heavy, and no one would knock to tell me the light bill was getting too high. The next morning, I joined the others in the dining hall. There were no suspicious glances here, no smirks disguised as smiles, just a table of people, some chatting, some quietly sipping coffee. A woman named Lorraine waved me over. She had a laugh that made the whole table lean in. By the end of breakfast, I had been invited to join the writing group that met twice a week in the small library down the hall. When I went, I carried a folder with a few pieces from my wartime letters. My hands trembled as I read them aloud, not from fear of judgment, but from the simple, overwhelming truth that someone was listening again. When I finished, there was a moment of silence, then a soft murmur of appreciation. One man, a retired history teacher, said, "You kept their hearts alive." I felt the words settle somewhere deep, like a seed finally finding soil. Days passed quietly. I walked in the garden when the sun was warm enough, read in the library when it wasn't. The air felt different here, lighter, as though the weight I'd been carrying had finally eased enough to let me breathe without thinking about it. And yet, there were moments when my mind drifted back to Marcus. Not the man he was now, but the boy he had once been, small, wary, looking for approval in places that never gave it. I grieved for that boy, even as I could not forgive the man. Compassion for his brokenness didn't mean excusing the way he had broken me. One evening, as the first snow began to fall, Caleb came to visit. He walked in carrying a paper bag with pastries from my favorite bakery. The sight of him tall, smiling, cheeks red from the cold made my chest tighten. Over tea, he told me about his classes, his friends, and then, almost casually, about the volunteer work he had started. There's a local organization that works with older folks, he said, stirring his tea. They help with housing, legal advice, just making sure no one goes through what you did. I looked at him then, really looked, and saw not just my grandson, but a young man who had taken what he'd seen and turned it into action. That's good work, Caleb, I said quietly. It's not easy, but it matters. He reached across the table, his hand warm over mine. I learned from you. You didn't give up, even when they tried to take everything. That's what I want to remember. That's what I want to pass on. We sat like that for a long moment. The snow drifting down outside the window. The room filled with the gentle hum of the heater. The past was still there, heavy, marked with betrayal and loss, but it no longer defined the space between us. When he left that night, I stood by the window watching him walk to his car, the streetlights casting a soft glow over the snow. I realized that while the scars would remain, so would the lessons. And the future, whatever it looked like, was still ours to shape. For the first time in years, I felt the truth settle in me, like a quiet promise. I was not just surviving anymore. I was living. December arrived with a thin layer of frost across the garden paths. I was sitting in the library, hands wrapped around a mug of tea, when the email came. Dear Mrs. Moore, we are pleased to inform you that Letters of Resilience has been accepted for publication. I read the words twice before they truly sank in. My manuscript, the collection of my wartime letters interwoven with my recent writings, was no longer just mine. Soon, it would live out in the world, breathing on its own. The publisher had agreed that proceeds would go toward a scholarship for disadvantaged students. Just as I had hoped. It felt right. My words, born from years of pain and hope, would now open doors for someone else. The reading was set for the third week of December in the community hall. The night of the event, I stood behind the curtain, listening to the low hum of the audience, settling into their seats. My palms were damp, but my heartbeat was steady. This was not the trembling of fear I had known for so long. This was anticipation. When I stepped onto the small stage, the lights were warm against my face. I looked out over the rows of faces, some familiar from the community, others strangers who had come after reading the announcement in the paper. I began with one of my earliest letters, written to the mother of a soldier who had not come home. My voice didn't waver as I spoke the words I had once written in the quiet hours of the night, long ago. From there, I moved to my recent pieces, the ones that told of endurance in the face of betrayal, of choosing dignity when it would have been easier to disappear. There was no shame now, only a steady, quiet pride. When I finished, there was a moment of stillness before the applause came. A few days later, I heard through Margaret that Marcus and Cheryl had been sentenced fines, community service, and mandatory counseling. The news arrived like a letter I didn't need to open. I acknowledged it, then set it aside in my mind. I had no space left for their shadows. That evening, I sat at my desk with a blank sheet of paper and began my final letter to Caleb. My dear Caleb, your love gave me strength. When my own voice faltered, you carried it until I could speak again. I want you to remember that truth-telling is never wasted, even if it takes years for the words to find their place. Keep writing your truth, even when it's heavy. Especially when it's heavy. With all my love, Grandma. I slipped the letter into an envelope and placed it in the top drawer of my desk, knowing I would hand it to him when the time felt right. The following week, I walked into the library for the writing group. Lorraine was already there, her notebook open, her pen tapping against the page. Others were gathering, chairs scraping gently against the floor. I took my seat, feeling the quiet camaraderie of people who had learned to trust each other with words. When my turn came, I read a new piece. Not about abuse, not about loss, but about the first snowfall in Rochester. and the way light changes when it hits ice. The group listened, and when I finished, they smiled. As I looked around the table, I realized I was no longer measuring myself against the years I had lost. I was not just the woman who had been wronged. I was the woman who had endured, who had chosen to speak, whose words now carried forward into other lives. I was, finally, defined not by the hands that tried to break me, but by the resilience that refused to let them. And for the first time in a very long time, I knew I had the last word. I've learned that resilience is not about never breaking, but about choosing to rise even after being broken. Age does not erase your worth, it sharpens it. Because every scar carries a story, and every story has the power to inspire change. You are never too old to reclaim your voice, protect your dignity, and create a legacy that outlives the pain. If my story moved you, subscribe for more grandma revenge stories that prove it's never too late to take a stand.